What's up, everybody? Welcome back, English 375. We got another class for you coming today. And what we're going to be looking at today is how to draw the possessive S in our syntax trees. It's been one of the things that we were supposed to get to last week, but got put off due to the class cancellation on Friday, and then I told you to kind of fudge it on your homework. So now we're coming back to it, and we're going to be talking about possessive S, this apostrophe S construction. So we're doing that. We're gonna do a few different things, take this a few different places. We're gonna look at what to do with apostrophe S possessives. We're gonna note three things about their distribution that are gonna help us determine where they go in our tree structure, and then we're gonna look at how to actually draw them. And we'll do a little bit of practice where I just give you an example sentence and then I'll go through it on this whiteboard, our handy dandy whiteboard, of course. Okay, so the general plan is what do we do with apostrophe S's? And in order to figure that out, we want to think more critically about where the properties of this apostrophe S. We're going to use some sort of like reasoning to reason out what we need to do with this apostrophe S. So we're going to go through three observations. Three observations about apostrophe S. The first observation about apostrophe S is that there can only be one. We can only have one sort of possessor phrase, right? So something like the king's castle is totally fine. But something like the king's, the dog's, the queen's castle, ungrammatical. It doesn't really make sense. There seems to be a limitation on how many of these possessor phrases we can get, right? There's a limitation there. Now, if we think back to our Xbar structure, that sort of prototypical, XP goes to Xbar, goes to Xbar, goes to X with the different pieces coming off of it, we decided on three positions that we had. We had complement positions. You'll remember this very well. We went over this in detail. The complement position is sister to the X head. Sister to the X head. The adjunct position is sister to an X bar. And daughter of an X bar. Sister to an X bar, daughter of an X bar. And then the last position that we haven't talked much about was the specifier position. And the specifier position was also sister to an X bar, but it was the daughter of the XP phrase. I'll actually draw this so we can see it a little bit more clearly again. Just for reference, so we zone in on what I'm talking about here. All right. This is what I'm talking about. Whoa. This is what I'm talking about. This default Xbar structure that we're looking at. And so we can see that we've got the complement down here, this Y and P. It's sister to that X head. Think about the structural relationships. And it's daughter of an X bar. We've got this adjunct, which is sister to an X bar and the daughter of an X bar. And then over there on the far side, we've got the specifier, which is also sister to an X bar, just like the adjunct, but it differentiates itself by being the daughter of the phrasal level. And so when we're thinking about this, there's some important distinctions to talk about. We already talked about how because the complement is sister to the X head, there can only be one of them. Only one complement. Because the adjunct is sister to X bar and daughter of X bar, and X bars are iterative. Adjuncts are also iterative. You can have as many adjuncts as you like. Let's think about specifiers on this far side. It's hard to do. Let's think about specifiers. Do we think that those are iterative, like adjuncts, or can there only be one of them, like complements? Take a second and think about that. What would make that property be true or not? They're not iterative. There can only be one specifier per phrase. Why is that the case? Well, if we're sticking to our binary branching trees, and we are, there can only be two daughters of the phrasal level thing. One of those is guaranteed to be an Xbar. One of the daughters of the phrasal level thing is guaranteed to be the Xbar. And the other one is going to be the specifier. And there can't be any other daughters of the XP because it's binary branching. So there can only be one specifier because it has to be part of its structural definition is that it's the daughter of the phrasal level XP. So there can only be one specifier, there can only be one complement, we can have as many adjuncts as we want. Now let's rewind. Ooh, other side. We're rewinding to thinking about these possessor phrases, like the kings, the dogs, the queen's castle. And we said that there can only be one of these phrases. What's that going to lead us to believe about these possessor phrases? Critical thinking, right? Hopefully I foreshadowed that super obviously. They're not adjuncts. They're not adjuncts. They could either be at this point, they could be specifiers or complements. Both of those can only allow one, and we see that this, in fact, only allows one. They're not adjuncts. They're not just, modifiers of that like adjectives are, for instance. There's something more specific going on there. Cool. That's observation number one. We can only have one of these possessor phrases. We're going to split this roughly up into two parties here, the possessor and the possessed, right? So the king's castle. The king is the possessor and the castle is the possessed. That's how we'll be talking about this. That won't be super important as we go through this lecture, but it may come up at several points, just so we have our phrases, our terminology in line. Okay, our second observation here about these is the question, where does it attach? Where does the apostrophe S, specifically the apostrophe S, attach in a tree? And here we have some observations that we can make as well. It appears sort of our default knowledge about these apostrophe S. Think about orthography. I don't often ask you to think about orthography, but I will right now. If we're thinking about orthography, we see that the apostrophe S, it does attach to a specific word, right? The king's castle. It attaches to king. And this leads us to believe that we want the apostrophe S to play a part, perhaps to modify in some way, to be part of the tree skeleton for the NP king in the king's castle. But we find counter evidence to that pretty readily available. Sorry, there's trucks driving outside my window right now, if you can hear that. So we have something like here, the house's balcony, where it looks like that apostrophe S wants to attach to house. But we see that it actually moves around more than that, right? Take a look at this second sentence. The house down the road's balcony. The house down the road's balcony. Has the possessive situation actually changed? Is it suddenly the road's balcony now and not the house's balcony any longer? In that second sentence? The house down the road's balcony? No, it's not. It's not the road's balcony, despite the fact that the apostrophe S attaches to road. Instead, what we see is that it looks like this whole apostrophe S thing is coming after the whole possessor phrase. It seems to be in tune with phrasal boundaries, right? If I draw in some phrase boundaries for a DP, we see that it's the house is balcony, and we see that it's the house down the road's balcony. Sorry, this is a little messy. Right, it's the house is balcony, and it's also the house down the road is balcony. It goes at that phrasal boundary. That's one observation of where does it attach. It's not really attaching to any of those single words. We can keep putting down in other modifiers for the house, and it's just going to keep getting pushed further and further back. But there is another observation here, which is that this apostrophe S, what is it staying sort of constantly nearby? Well, it's kind of staying constantly nearby. Oh, other hand, this hand. It's constantly staying by balcony, actually. This is balcony. The house, this is balcony, and the house down the road is balcony. Right? The house down the road is balcony. It's actually staying nearby to balcony. That's going to be important moving on. But this tells us something about the distribution that orthography doesn't really get us at, right? As speakers of English, we just do this process of the houses and the house down the road's balcony. But we want to think what that means for our syntactic trees and draw further awareness to that sort of strange property. This isn't a suffix, right? Were this a suffix, it would attach to a steady thing. Instead, it appears kind of to be its own word, right? Kind of appears to be its own word based on the fact that it can move around like this, based on what the rest of the sentence looks like. Its own head, anyway. We're going to say it's probably its own head of a phrase. Whew. 2 observations down. We just got 1 more to go. Possibly the most important observation. All of these are going to be important in how we end up drawing these trees. Our last observation is that apostrophe S possessives, there we go, apostrophe S possessives appear in complementary distribution with determiners. If you've taken 370, we've talked about, well, at least if you've taken it from me, we've talked a lot about complementary distribution in other realms of language, like phonology in particular. If you haven't, that's okay. What this means is that you can choose one. You can either get an apostrophe S or you can get a determiner, but you cannot have both. You cannot have both. They never appear at the same time. So you can get the King's Mountain, where you have that apostrophe S before mountain, but you can't get a sentence like the King's the mountain. It doesn't, that's ungrammatical, right? The King's the mountain, the King's a mountain. That means that the king is a mountain, and that's not what we want. We want the apostrophe S possessive. So it's the King's mountain, the King's the mountain. Yeah. And so just like in other elements of complementary distribution, like in phonology, when we find things where you have to only choose one, where you get one or the other, we're going to say they're things of the same type. Right? We have one slot to fill, and you can either fill it with an apostrophe S or a determiner, like the or a. That tells us that that apostrophe S goes into that determiner slot. That's why you can't have both. This tells us which morphosyntactic category apostrophe S is. It's a determiner. It's in complementary distribution with the other determiners. And even more specifically than that, what's it the determiner of? Or, right, that's weird. It's not this first one. Oh man, my hands. It's not taking place of this first the one that comes before king. It's part of this relationship. The phrase which will contain mountain. The mountain, z mountain. The mountain, z mountain. A mountain, z mountain. It's part of that second phrase. We want it to be the determiner, where we would normally put the in their tree structure, the mountain. We're now going to put apostrophe S, mountain. All right. So we know, let's do a quick recap of our observations. We know we want the apostrophe S to be a D head, a determiner head. And we know which determiner we want it to be. We want it to be, as you can think of it as the determiner of the possessed, not of the possessor. Right? In the King's Mountain, it's the determiner that goes before mountain, not before king. It's more closely related to mountain than it is to king. So we know that it's a determiner, and we know kind of what it's modifying there. Yeah, that's a rough way of thinking it, but that'll do. We know that, and we know that we want the possessor, the king, that we can only have one of them. So we kind of know what position we want that one to be in. So let's take a look at what this looks like on a tree, and then we'll look at that tree and see how our observations fit. I have to erase things, apologies. Think about something really fun for like a second while I draw a tree. Hope everything's going well with you guys. That you're staying safe, staying healthy. All right, tree drawing time. More erasing. Trees are big. I'm going to draw the tree for the house's balcony. All right. The house's balcony, coming right up. I may double check, make sure I didn't do anything wrong. Just as prone is doing things wrong here. All right. So this is the structure that we're ultimately going to want to end up with. The house's balcony. And so what we'll notice about this tree is that this possessor phrase, the house, right? That's whose balcony it is. That's the possessor phrase, the house, is a specifier off of this higher DP. It's the specifier of a higher DP. The house's balcony. This possessor is the specifier. Why is that important that it's the specifier? This fits our observation that there can only be one possessor. Right? There can only be one specifier, so it's really nice for us to have the possessor be in the specifier position because there can only be one of each of those things. It's a good match. We only get one specifier and we only want one possessor, so it's a nice place to put that. That was one of our observations. Observation number 2, well, let's get to that in a second. Observation number 3 we're going to talk about as well. This was the fact that it's in complementary distribution. Apostrophe S is in complementary distribution with the determiners. Here we see that we have that, right? This apostrophe S here is a determiner. That's going to get us this observation number 3, that it's in complementary distribution with a determiner. Where would we put, if we wanted the house is the balcony, where would we put that other the? We have nowhere to put it. The D slot is already taken by the apostrophe S. You can't have another D for the. You can have this the over here, obviously. That's not the one we're talking about. We're saying you can't have a the in this position because we already have the apostrophe S. The house's balcony. So we've got observation number 1 taken care of. Possessor is in the specifier position. We've got observation number 3 taken care of, the complementary distribution of this apostrophe S and other determiners. Observation number 2 was the fact that the apostrophe S seems to go at the end, oh, I can't do that, at the end of the possessor phrase totally. And we can see a little bit of that now. here's the possessor phrase, and note that the apostrophe S is going to come right after that. So we have the house's balcony. But the interesting part is that if we add things in here, right now, kind of linearly, the apostrophe S is attaching to house in the house's balcony. But if we add in modifiers to what kind of house, that's going to change. So let's try to draw our sentence from observation 2 that I erased with my hand. It was the house down the road's balcony. The house down the road's balcony. And we're going to see that we want the down the road to modify off of this N bar here, or probably since it's an adjunct. Is it an adjunct? We won't worry about that too much. I'll think about that later. It's modifying this, so we're going to put it in here. And we'll see what that does specifically for our position of the apostrophe S. Some quick drawing. Be thinking about that adjunct complement question if you really want. I suspect it's actually an adjunct. I ran out of room. Well, you should still be able to get the idea from my shortened tree. Boom. So now we see we added in this prepositional phrase. Oops. This prepositional phrase over here, apologies for the whiteboard action, which is down the road. The house down the road's balcony. The house down the road's balcony. And now we see when you add in more material over here, it changes what this apostrophe S, man, I'm getting worse at this as it goes on. It changes what the apostrophe S attaches to. Now it's going to appear as though the apostrophe S attaches to the road, just like we add in the house down the road's balcony. But we note that it's really just coming all the way after that possessor phrase DP. And it's sticking close to balcony. It's not necessarily like, hopefully that makes sense. Take a second and think about that. Why that apostrophe S is attaching in orthography to a different word now. Now it's attaching to road since we added that material, but it still works in our position. We can account for, in this way of drawing trees, that variable position like we noted in observation number 2. So this tree structure accounts for all 3 of our observations. We only have one possessor because it's in the specifier of a DP position. We only have, we can account for its variable position, like the house's balcony versus the house down the road's balcony, based on this tree structure as well. And we can account for its complementary distribution with determiners by simply saying that it itself is a determiner, and that's where it is. This is actually one of the arguments that best supports why we have DPs above all of our NPs and we don't want bare NPs. It's actually pretty hard. You could try this as an experiment if you want. It's pretty hard to pull off this type of possessive S structure if you try to have NPs above the determiner. It's really quite difficult. This was, like I said, one of the core arguments for the existence of the sort of DP structure that we're using now by Abney in the 80s. Pretty breakthrough stuff back then. Breakthrough as far as syntax goes, anyway. And it led to a really kind of slick account of possessive S's that looks like this. Other things I wanted to say is that note that it's not the case that this apostrophe S is actually like super closely attached to balcony either. You can put things in between it in just the way that you would expect we could. We can put an adjective like the house down the road's yellow balcony. And that totally makes sense. That's just a normal adjunct modifier of balcony. We'd have to put another N bar in here and then we would branch it off this direction and put yellow right here. And you'd get the house down the road's yellow balcony. So it's not necessarily that it's ultra close tied to that noun, the apostrophe S balcony, but it's nonetheless closer tied. It's part of this possessed DP instead of being part of the possessor one. Sweet. Okay. You can also think the last thing I want to note is on your homework. I may cover this a little bit on Friday. If send me emails if you'd like me to talk about this more, essentially. But you can also see how this would affect binding, like you should have seen in your last homework, which I'm hoping to get back to you relatively soon. Is that this does have effects on binding. That this is the house down the road's balcony is a balcony. It's not a house or a house down the road, right? So if we mark this with indices, which again, these indices are telling us sort of what semantic entity we're talking about. We'll see that we can mark balcony with an I, and we'll mark house with a J, and our tree is going to get really messy, so I'm working with a little baby whiteboard. So I marked the house with J and the balcony here with I. And we see that this higher DP is entity I. It's a balcony. It's the balcony. Which means that the house, so the balcony could bind things outside. It could go up one to that TP level and then back down. The house is going to be in a position to possibly bind something like an object. Take a look at your homework on homework 4 if you want to think more about that. But that the house, entity J, isn't in a position to bind anything outside of this tree structure because it only goes up one level. It goes up to this DP and then down. Yep. There is an interaction with binding here. That's all I wanted to say about that. The main take-home point, though, is that you can do this. And this is going to be our general structure. So the important things to note again is that you've got a DP coming off of the specifier position of a higher DP. First DP and then a second DP in the specifier position of that DP. Whew. I think we did it, team. How long have we been recording? We're sitting at about half an hour here, it looks like. That's what I wanted to say about DPs. That's our subject for today. We're going to start talking probably about movement and moving things around our tree. We've basically been generating things in our tree and leaving them there up to this point. It's all going to change. There will be a Foreign Language Friday as well this Friday. The group just finished theirs. I'm going to figure out how to get that video to you so that you can watch that on Friday as well. So we'll probably have a dual thing. You'll have your first Foreign Language Friday with a presentation from your class, which I'm really excited about, from your classmates. And then I'll talk a little bit as well, probably setting the stage. I probably won't get too deep into it because we're moving into spring break, but we'll start a new topic then. If you have any questions, so several people sent me questions about sort of the last lecture topic. That's excellent. Please continue to do that. What I would love to do, my ideal plan for Friday's class would be sort of to take a bunch of the questions that I've received and make another video about them and just talk about those questions. Because if you're having a question, if something wasn't clear in one of my lectures, like this one, for instance, there's a pretty good chance that somebody else in the class also didn't quite understand what I was going up. That basically it's on me, it's not on you. Especially because you can look back and rewind these things. So if it doesn't make sense after rewinding it, yeah, we need to talk about that more. So please do send me emails, and I'm happy to cover anything, any questions you have in Friday's little lecture. And like I said, after that, we'll move forward and we'll roll with it. Yeah, we'll make this work. It's getting smoother. It's getting a little better. Hope things are going well for you. Check in. Let me know how they're doing, how you're doing, how you're keeping up, and if there's anything I can do to help. Otherwise, I'll let you go, and I'll catch you guys next time on Friday for the lecture and also for the English Foreign Language Fridays. Specifically, not English Fridays. Have a good one.